You're talking to your dog. Maybe you just said the word walk in the middle of a sentence about something completely unrelated. Maybe you made a weird noise, or your voice went up at the end of a question. And your dog, without any warning, does that thing. The head goes sideways. One ear lifts. The eyes lock onto yours with an intensity that feels almost human. And for a second, you forget what you were even saying because you're busy melting. Most people see that and think, adorable, confused, a little goofy. And listen, it is adorable. We're not going to pretend otherwise. But behavioral neuroscience tells a completely different story. What your dog is doing right now, in that exact moment, ears perked, eyes narrowed, head tilted precisely to one side, is one of the most sophisticated acts of social cognition documented in any non-human species on Earth. They are not confused. They are not performing for you. They are analyzing you. And most owners have absolutely no idea. Let's start with the acoustic theory, because it sounds completely reasonable. The idea goes like this. Dogs tilt their heads to better funnel sound into their ear canal, adjusting the angle of their ear flap, the pinna, to more precisely locate the source of a sound. They hear something they can't quite place. They tilt. They triangulate. Simple, clean, logical. And here's the thing. That's partially true. Dogs do use head tilts to improve directional hearing. We'll get into that. But here's the problem. If this were purely about acoustics, you'd see dogs tilting their heads at rustling leaves, at car engines, at the television, at literally anything that produces an ambiguous sound. But that's not what happens. Watch your dog carefully. The tilt shows up most consistently when a human being is talking. Specifically, when a human being is talking to them. Point a speaker playing random ambient noise at your dog, minimal tilt. Talk to your dog directly, with your face visible, in a conversational tone, and that head swings sideways like clockwork. So why you? Why your face? Why the words coming specifically from your mouth? The answer isn't just anatomy. It's cognition. It's relationship. And it goes back further than you'd ever expect. In 2021, researchers at the Family Dog Project at Yavuz University in Budapest published a study that stopped the scientific community cold. They were studying gifted word learner dogs, dogs capable of learning the names of dozens of objects, and they noticed something unexpected. Every time these dogs were asked to retrieve a named object, and they were actively processing the instruction, they tilted their heads. Consistently, reliably. And what they found was extraordinary. The dogs who tilted their heads were significantly more successful at the task, retrieving the correct object more often than dogs who did not tilt. The tilt wasn't random. It wasn't decorative. It was correlated with comprehension. Lead researcher Andrea Samis and her team concluded that the head tilt, in these dogs, appeared to be a physical expression of mental engagement. The brain working. The dog not just hearing a sound, but processing meaningful information. Now, think about what that means. In attachment psychology, there is a concept called contingent responsiveness, the idea that a bonded pair picks up on the subtle signals of the other and responds. A mother who leans in when her infant makes a sound. A partner who mirrors your expression when you're upset. It's the physical body saying, I am paying attention to you specifically. When your dog tilts their head while you're speaking, they are performing the single most fundamental behavior in social bonding psychology, demonstrating attunement. They're not confused. They're not asking you to repeat yourself. They're telling you, you are worth concentrating on. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because this isn't just psychology. It's geometry. And then it's chemistry. Here's the geometry part first, because it matters. Research published in Animal Cognition, building on earlier work from Dr. Stanley Coren at the University of British Columbia, proposed something elegant. Dogs may tilt their heads because their muzzles get in the way. Think about it from your dog's perspective. If you have a substantial snout, and most dogs do, and you're trying to read the expression on a human face directly in front of you, your muzzle is physically blocking the lower portion of that face. The mouth, the jaw, the parts of the face that carry enormous emotional information. Dogs, it turns out, read human emotional expressions. This has been demonstrated conclusively. They distinguish happy faces from angry ones. They show a left gaze bias when viewing human faces, meaning they look to their left, which processes the right side of your face, where human emotional expression is typically more pronounced. They care deeply about your face. And when Dr. Coren surveyed owners and cross-referenced it with breed snout length, dogs with flatter faces, bulldogs, pugs, tilted their heads significantly less than dogs with longer muzzles. Because they didn't need to. The view was already unobstructed. The head tilt, in part, is your dog moving their nose out of the way so they can see your emotions more clearly. Now let's talk about what happens in the brain when they do. A 2015 study from Nagasawa and colleagues at Azabu University in Japan, published in Science, documented something that fundamentally changed how we understand the dog-human relationship. When dogs and their owners engaged in mutual eye contact, both species showed significant increases in oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the same neurochemical that surges between a mother and newborn child. This is not a small finding. Wolves, even wolves raised by humans, do not show this response with their human caretakers. The oxytocin loop is specific to domestic dogs. It co-evolved over thousands of years between this species and ours. Now think about what happens when your dog tilts their head. They are making sustained, intentional eye contact with you. They are reading your facial expression. They are orienting their entire skull toward your voice. Every one of these behaviors independently triggers that oxytocin loop, in them and in you. The head tilt isn't just cute. It is, neurochemically, an act of love. So when did this start? The answer is basically from the beginning. Or rather, from a beginning so distant it predates written language, agriculture, and the wheel. Approximately 15,000 to 40,000 years ago, certain wolves began approaching human encampments. Not the boldest ones, not the most aggressive. The ones who were, by genetic accident, slightly less afraid of eye contact, slightly more attuned to human facial cues and emotional signals. These were the ones who weren't chased away, who shared scraps, who, slowly, began to change. Here's the genetics part. Domestic dogs carry unique insertions in genes on chromosome 6, including the gene GTF2I, associated with hypersocial behavior and increased tolerance of proximity to strangers. These insertions are not found in wolves. They emerged through domestication. And one of the traits they're associated with is an almost compulsive interest in human faces and human communication. Dogs didn't just get tamer. They got more tuned to us, more interested in our expressions, our voices, our gestures. In 2012, archaeologists excavating a burial site in Predmosty, Czech Republic, found evidence of dogs buried alongside humans, their mouths placed near the humans' hands, in what researchers believe were intentional, ritualistic burials. These animals were not tools. They were not livestock. They were family. And your dog's head tilt is a direct behavioral descendant of that 15,000-year-old relationship. Every time they swivel that head toward your voice, they are doing something that has been genetically reinforced across millennia of living beside human beings, paying attention to human beings, surviving because they were good at reading human beings. Your dog isn't doing something unusual. They're doing something ancient. Now, I want to tell you about a study that doesn't get nearly enough attention because the finding seems almost paradoxical at first. Researchers studying canine communication found that dogs tilt their heads more frequently in response to emotionally positive or excited human speech, but they also tilt in response to uncertainty, to words they almost recognize but can't quite place, to the specific tonal quality of a question. Here's the paradox. In controlled conditions, dogs shown recordings of human speech were more behaviorally engaged when the speech was just beyond their comprehension than when it was clearly within it. In other words, the tilt happens most when they're working the hardest to understand you. And almost every owner who has studied their dog's tilt behavior closely reports the same thing. It feels like being really listened to, not passively heard, actively listened to. The way you feel when someone leans forward in a conversation and says, "Wait, say that again." How is it possible that a sign of cognitive effort feels like emotional intimacy? Because maybe they're the same thing. Maybe the effort of trying to understand someone, the full body orientation, the focused attention, the refusal to be distracted, is what intimacy is. In any species, your dog isn't failing to understand you. They're working so hard to understand you that it's visible in their anatomy. And this is where it gets deep. In 2024, researchers studying interspecies behavioral synchrony found something that recontextualized all of this. Using heart rate monitoring and cortisol sampling across bonded dog owner pairs, they found that during moments of direct communication, including face-to-face interaction where gaze sharing and vocalization occurred simultaneously, owners and dogs showed correlated physiological responses. Heart rate variability moved in tandem. Cortisol levels tracked together. Their nervous systems were in sync. When the same measurements were taken with unfamiliar dogs and unfamiliar humans, no synchrony. The correlation was specific to bonded pairs. Now think about what the head tilt represents in this context. Your dog hears your voice and turns toward you, makes eye contact, reads your expression, initiates the oxytocin loop. And somewhere in that process, in that moment of concentrated, full body attention, your two nervous systems begin to harmonize. The head tilt isn't the beginning of that process. It might be the signal that the process has begun. This only happens within bonded pairs. This only happens because of 15,000 years of coevolution. This only happens because your dog finds your face, your voice, and your emotional state genuinely, neurologically important. The head tilt isn't a quirk. It's a window into one of the deepest interspecies bonds on this planet. There's one last thing I need to tell you, and it might be the most important part of this video. If your dog has been tilting their head regularly, at your voice, during conversations, when you say certain words, and one day, they stop, don't brush it off. A sudden, unexplained disappearance of the head tilt can signal several things. First, a hearing change. Partial or progressive hearing loss, particularly common in older dogs, will reduce the behavior because the auditory trigger is simply less vivid. Second, and this is the one to take seriously, in some cases a persistent, involuntary head tilt to one side, especially if accompanied by loss of balance or unusual eye movement, is a neurological symptom requiring immediate veterinary attention. This is called vestibular disease, and it can look almost identical to the adorable communicative tilt, except it won't go away, and it will be paired with disorientation. Your dog doesn't have language. Behavior is the only channel they have. The communicative tilt says, "I'm listening to you." The pathological tilt says, "Something is wrong." Know the difference. Watch for it. So the next time your dog looks at you mid-sentence, mid-ramble about your day, mid-weird noise, mid-accidentally saying, "walk," and that head tips sideways, one ear up, eyes locked on yours like you're the most important source of information in the room, remember what's actually happening. 15,000 years of coevolution, a neurochemical feedback loop that no other species shares with us in quite this way. A brain actively working to decode your face, your voice, your meaning. An anatomy literally repositioning itself so it can see your emotions more clearly. All of it pointed at one conclusion: you are worth figuring out. You are worth the effort. To your dog, in that moment, your face is the most interesting thing in the world. And honestly, the science suggests that when you feel something looking at you like that, something ancient and attentive and completely unburdened by ego or agenda, it might be doing something for you too. If this changed the way you see your dog's head tilt, subscribe to this channel and drop a comment below. I want to know what word or sound triggers the tilt most reliably in your dog. And if you want to understand why your dog makes direct eye contact with you while they're doing something they know they're not supposed to do, the science behind that behavior is the next video. And what they're actually communicating in those moments is stranger and more profound than you'd ever guess.